Today, Freedom Central is in Amsterdam, chatting to Richard Dolan at the start of the Secret Space Program conference.
I thought, well, wait a minute. You know, if this is even partly true, if some of these documents are valid as it seems, why had I never read about this in any academic history book ever? How could that not be interesting? There's something going on. I call it a clandestine Cold War that's happening. So in other words, I'm absolutely convinced that the more someone watches CNN or any of these other mainstream, the less likely they are to understand the actual machinations of the world around them. The more that the world is going to seem like a big fog to them when some new event happens. Because what we've been fed 24/7 by a mainstream propaganda industry is just one lie after another after another. Nations need to understand that they are not dealing with a so-called level playing field. We're dealing with a rigged game in a lot of ways. And that is the moment in which billions of people on planet Earth are going to have a moment with themselves. And they're going to say, have I been wasting my life? Is there another way for me to create my own life, to envision how I can live as a human being? Because there are these other beings here, and they don't operate like we do. And so I think that's going to be the great wake-up call for us as a species. There's an outside world there, and a lot of people, even if they may be sympathetic, they still don't have a lot of the information available. And I feel part of my job is to give them that information, to make it very plain and clear as to why this topic matters. And it does matter.
You are a well-respected writer, researcher in the area of ufology and extraterrestrial matters, off-world affairs. What really brought you on this particular journey communicating this information?
Well, I started this journey over 15, 16 years ago, knowing absolutely nothing about anything to do with UFOs. I stumbled across the topic at the time. I was working on a doctoral dissertation in history and Cold War studies, and they don't study flying saucers in graduate school when you're working on something like that. But I was in a bookstore, and I encountered, in fact, one of the books of one of my fellow presenters here at this conference, Timothy Good, who wrote Above Top Secret, and the subtitle was The Worldwide UFO Cover-Up. And it was that book that I saw in a store. I believe it was 1994, and it just intrigued me very much. I flipped through the book. I'll never forget this. Recognizing many of the names and departments from my own study, and he was writing about them in this totally different context. You know, here is I working on the Truman administration in a very conventional Truman versus the Soviets and the birth of the CIA and the Korean War and all of this. And then here's Tim Good writing about the Truman administration in part in the context of UFOs. And I thought, well, wait a minute. You know, if this is even partly true, if some of these documents are valid as it seemed, and if there was an interest in UFOs, even if it was a mistaken interest in UFOs, I thought, why had I never read about this in any academic history book ever? How could that not be interesting? In what dimension of reality is that not interesting? So that was the initial question. And it wasn't, are UFOs real back then? I was much more conservative. I just wanted to know, is there anything to this historically? Is this part of my history? I want to know. And, of course, that snowballed into this lifelong journey that I've had ever since. The field just grabs you, sucks you in, and doesn't let you go, at least not with me. And so I ended up writing 2 volumes of history, each more than 500 pages. And I wrote a third book, which isn't history, but about the future. It's a kind of an investigation of how the world might look after the end of UFO secrecy. But I've still got the third volume of history in the works, and that will complete a 3-volume trilogy of UFOs in the modern era. So that's become my life's work.
All right. And it's been quite a challenge, I'd imagine. Do you come up against a lot of people trying to stop you or hamper your work or throw you off direction?
Yeah, I think sometimes this has happened. For a few years, in the early part of the decade of the 2004, 2005. This was shortly after I came out, not because of UFOs, but on the issue of 9/11. To my knowledge, I was certainly one of the first established UFO researchers to offer a public opinion on 9/11, which was that I argued, yes, it is an inside job, and I didn't believe the official story on that. And once I started speaking about that in conferences, I discovered that my name was flagged at every airport I flew out of. So I was never prevented from flying, but I was always delayed. So I'd go to the desk, the person, this is before the security, and the person at the desk would say, "Oh, Richard Dolan. Oh, one moment, sir." And they'd make this phone call, and I'd have to wait 15 minutes or more before they would finally let me through. And this happened multiple times within a flight. If I had a transfer, it happened again. It was like someone was out to delay or annoy me or whatever. At that time, my luggage was frequently diverted to Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C., opened up, rifled through. I would get it back a day or two later. It was obvious that something was going on. I would get white vans in front of my house frequently. On one occasion, this is around the same time, 04, 05, my office is, I have a nice small little office in one part of my house, and I came into the kitchen, and my wife was in the kitchen, and she said, "You know, that white van's been in front of this house for 2 hours. That guy's been in there." Unmarked white van, this is very common. And I said, "Damn it, I'm going to go out and knock on his window right now. I want to find out who this is." So I'll never forget this. I walked out the side door of my house. The moment my foot hit the sidewalk, he just drove off. So, coincidence? I don't know. You can decide what you want. But I assume that I was being listened to. I've had a number of people with electronics expertise who are convinced that I've been bugged and so on. But I've never had a threat, an overt threat. I've never had anyone say to me directly, "Don't do what you're doing." I have had a number of insiders who have supported what I do. People who have had a great deal of information who tell me that they believe in what I do, and that other researchers, that this is important work. One thing that has become very clear to me is that within the classified world, it's not monolithic, that's for sure, and there are always people who have a different opinion. They may have taken a security oath, they may have been in the system for 20 or more years, but they may also have decided that, you know what, the secrecy on this is not necessarily the best thing for the world. And then their mission becomes to find a way safely to communicate some of what they know to outside researchers, and some of those people have come to me. And that's always a problem. My professional training is as a historian. I'm always used, and my instincts are always to use open sources for everything that I do. Anyone who reads one of my books can go through more than 1,000 citations per book and see exactly where I get what I get. The problem, though, is when you get someone who's got a long-standing clandestine career, they can't really come to you and say, "Well, you can use my name." They can't do that. They get to be at risk, and it's a difficult situation. And also, not just protecting their name, but they have to be careful about what kind of information they give, because the information itself might be traced back to them. And so it's tricky, and that makes it very unsatisfactory when, you as a researcher have to communicate or decide to communicate this to the rest of the world, because the other people listening could be skeptical, rightly so, and they'll say, "Hey, well, you're not giving up your source, so how are we really supposed to believe you?" So with that type of information, I publish only a very small amount of that. Most of what I get privately, I have to keep to myself, and I continually try to work that and find corroboration. It's difficult.
Obviously, this is such a huge field of research. When you have an audience and you giving information out to people, what is the point of focus that you go in on, the vein of attack, as to do your most effective way of waking them up?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, one of the things I always do every place I go is to assume that there are people out there who really don't know a lot about this. The one thing I don't ever want to do is to continually preach to the choir. There's an outside world there, and a lot of people, even if they may be sympathetic, they still don't have a lot of the information available. And I feel part of my job is to give them that information, to make it very plain and clear as to why this topic matters. And it does matter. Ultimately, one thing that I come back to over and over is to provide the documentation that proves, not that necessarily UFOs are ET or alien, although that's interesting and possible, but that proves But there's something traveling around the skies of this world that is not supposed to exist, and moreover, that our jets chase them. And that, to me, is a slam dunk you can take, absolutely not arguable any longer. There is an overwhelming abundance of documentation to prove that jet fighters chase UFOs. And anyone who doubts it can go to any number of government documents I have on my website and are available elsewhere. You can just read them, and it makes it very plain as day. Now, the question is why? Yeah. Is that what you wanted to know? Why do we chase them? Well, a couple of reasons, I think. On the most prosaic level, let's say that you were the commander of an Air Force base, and which is restricted airspace, and these objects are seen coming over that restricted airspace. Clearly, you need to know what that is, and at some point you will scramble jets or other personnel to deal with this. So it's a security matter. And hence, the title of my 2 volumes of history is UFOs and the National Security State. In other words, not just UFOs, but it's the interaction of UFO phenomenon with the military intelligence community that I call the National Security State. So it's a military issue. It's a military issue, not just the U.S., but around the world. The other reason that these jets are scrambled is that these objects, in a number of instances, have shown that they've been able to tamper with our technology. They've disabled nuclear sites. They have been able to disable electronics equipment of our top fighter aircraft. So they have capabilities that clearly, we want to know about. But as to all of the reasons why we chase them, well, this I don't know. There's something going on. I call it a clandestine Cold War that's happening, in which you've got jet chases happening on a fairly regular basis in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and right up to our own era. This has not stopped. This is not ancient history. It's contemporary. And I'm sure the next decade we'll see yet more instances of our craft chasing these things.
At Freedom Central, we provide a platform for people who, like yourself, have a message for humanity. Many of us who are on this journey are communicating this information for a reason. What is your particular message?
Oh, wow. Well, one of them is 2 words, no fear. I think that one thing we have to keep in mind in this world is there's a lot of things to be concerned about, but we need to make our decisions based on facts, not copying and pasting the latest internet rumor that we've heard on our Facebook page. I find this is happening a lot. What we need to do is to calm down a little bit and not allow ourselves to get worked up and scared and excited over every little thing that comes up. That's an easy way to have a nervous breakdown. It's an easy way to raise your blood pressure and to die, 20 years ahead of your time. And it's not that there aren't things to be concerned about. There are. And when I say no fear, I mean that. So in other words, the 2 greatest enemies I think that we have in our era are fear and hope. Hope is kind of an odd choice. But really, let me deal with hope first. When I say it's an enemy, it's this type of hope where we say, I really want things to be better. Well, we all want things to be better. But what that means is when we're focusing on this utopian outcome that we would like, it seems to me that we're very easy to miss the on-the-ground reality that we're dealing with today. So in that sense, hope can be sort of counterproductive. But fear is worse because when we're afraid of either these other beings or the secret keepers themselves or of all the horrible environmental catastrophes that we are dealing with, we're also not seeing clearly. We need to stay calm. We need to assess each new event, not allowing ourselves to jump off immediately into a conclusion, but really taking time to try to investigate and find facts to support our position. And that's sometimes difficult to do, but one of the frustrations that some of my friends have with me personally is that I often don't have an opinion on every single new thing that happens. People said, well, do you think that HAARP caused the earthquake outside of Japan? I said, well, I don't know. I don't think so, but maybe it did, but I don't know. A lot of other people are not so hesitant to offer their opinions. I tend to wait. Again, maybe this is my training as a historian. I tend to take the long view. But I think I try to be detached as much as I can. I try to stay calm, and I try to get access to what factual information I can get before I make my decision. And the last thing about no fear is simply that I really do have faith in humanity. As badly as things look right now, I think that we as a collective have an ability to deal with whatever comes up down the road. Look, our species has had crises and catastrophe since we've been walking on the ground of this planet. That will never stop. But I think that we have a great capacity to deal with the difficulties that lay ahead, and I think that we will deal with it.
If we have the ability to deal with it, say the exposure of extraterrestrials, or officially the government's coming through, why do you think, 90% of the population of America believe that the government's lying to them in recent polls about the extraterrestrial existence on world or off-world for that matter.
Right.
Why do they continue to withhold this from us or not come out officially?
Well, this is one of my favorite topics to think about and to talk about. I just wrote a book dealing with it called AD After Disclosure. It's I co-authored this with Bryce Zabel, and it's a speculative, but a on-the-ground speculation, as it were, of what might happen after UFO secrecy ended. I think that the end of this secrecy is inevitable. Even though it seems impossible, it is inevitable. And once it happens, the changes in our society, in our world, are going to be profound. And so, after writing that book, it was a real intellectual adventure for me. It occurred to me, it's not hard to see why the secret keepers would want to keep things as they are. Too much will change. Yes, a lot of it will change for the better, but there's going to be a lot of uncertainty. No question about it. Think of something as basic to our world as energy. All right, we live in a petroleum-dominated world, obviously. Everything that we do in some way or another hinges on petroleum. Even a product that you buy, 90% of the cost that goes into a product has to do with the energy that went into making it and transporting it to get to you. And in our world, that's primarily petroleum. So one thing we can assume about the UFO reality is that whatever these objects use to get from point A to point B, it's not petroleum. It could be hot fusion, cold fusion, zero-point energy, something more exotic still. Whatever, it's not petroleum. And so the disclosure of this reality, you see, is going to put us all on the fast track to a post-petroleum world. Now, this is something that all of us need collectively as a species. We all know, everybody knows, that we cannot survive indefinitely on a petroleum kind of world. Even if it turns out to be almost infinite in supply, we'll still trash the globe in the process. It's not a good thing for us. And so we need to move to a place beyond that. And if it is in finite supply, that is, if we are hitting, as some people believe, peak oil now, well, then it's going to be even worse. We'll hit an infrastructure collapse, crunching, where will we fall to? Far down. We need something that's going to get us past. But in the short term, transitioning to a post-petroleum world is not going to be an easy thing at all. There are trillions and trillions of dollars in currency, euros, marks, whatever. Well, no marks. Euros, pounds, dollars, whatever, invested in petroleum. And those are enormous investments that are in danger of just going poof once there's disclosure on this reality. And those groups that have all this money invested in petroleum, they're simply not going to walk away from the table. There'll be a struggle there. And it'll cause disruption to the financial markets, I assume, and who knows. And then what happens if we all do get this free energy? Will it be utopia? You might have a device that will heat your home for free forever. That would be kind of nice. But what if it's possible for someone to transform that technology to a bomb that can blow up the Pacific Ocean? I mean, what if? In other words, what will happen is that the possession of this very, very profoundly advanced technology is going to have to be something, it seems to me, that will be managed globally. And that doesn't sound very nice to those of us who are already concerned about the development of a new world order, a global police state, right? So it seems to me that one of the great challenges in a post-disclosure world, one of the great opportunities, is that this disclosure, it doesn't have to be something that results in a global fascist police state. It might, and that's the danger. But it might also be that there's an opportunity here for the various world leaders, from the U.S. president to all other national leaders, to do two things. One, to find a sane, coordinated way to transition humanity to a post-petroleum world, and I think it would take global coordination. Actually, more than two things. Two, to coordinate ourselves globally to meet the challenge openly of this other presence on Earth. Whoever these other beings are interacting with us, it seems to me that we need to deal with this in a coordinated way. It's not just a U.S. thing. It's not just a U.K. thing. It's not just a South African thing. It's everyone. We have to deal with this in a coordinated way. And then three, here's the democratic moment here. Look at the United States, where in my country there's this massive, sprawling black budget apparatus that is clearly taking control of this secret, away from the U.S. president. Every indication says to me that the president is out of the loop on decision-making on black budget matters having to do with ET UFO reality. So that being said, after disclosure is forced, because that's the only way it'll come, the president's going to find himself caught between two poles. The people, on the one hand, who are going to be demanding democratic change. And then the elites, the people who put him into power to begin with. And there's going to be a real moment here where a president has to make a decision. Who am I going to side with? Now, he may choose to side with those elites that put him into power, but maybe not. Maybe not. And one of the things that I felt it was important for me to write in this book is to show how it might be done in a democratic way and done well, in a way that makes everyone happy. So I ultimately come back with a faith. I don't pretend that it's knowledge. It's a faith. What is faith? A little bit hope, a little bit belief, a little bit knowledge maybe. That the right decisions can be made so that the structure of secrecy, which has undermined the democratic foundation of our world, can be attacked and dismantled, at least to a large extent, so that we can, all of us, all global citizens, can meet this challenge with our eyes open and our ears open with actual information at our disposal.
In your investigations and through your research, I know you say you don't normally give comments on certain things, but what would you perceive, or have you come across anything to do with a potential Project Bluebeam scenario where the government use a fake alien invasion to coerce us into a one world government sort of thing?
Yeah, I've studied Bluebeam. The history of Bluebeam seems to derive from a gentleman who's now deceased named Serge Monast, who's a French-Canadian. Last October, in the run-up, I think, to up before October 13th, there was another Bluebeam rumor was making the rounds of the internet. And in fact, it was said that October 13th was supposed to be a Bluebeam event day that was going to happen, in which either a fake alien invasion or some kind of global religious event that was going to be engineered by the elites through holographic technology to create a kind of global police state. I was very skeptical in the lead up to that. In fact, I wrote an article before it saying it's not going to happen. The reason that I feel it wasn't going to happen is that when I looked into Monast himself, I became very skeptical that he had any genuine information whatsoever. And he seems to have originated this concept. What he said at the time in the 90s was that his source in NASA, now I have to ask myself, how does a French-Canadian who never left his geographic proximity, his area ever, to my knowledge, get to be tight with some guy at NASA? But the NASA guy supposedly said to him, yeah, we're working on this thing and we're going to create this technology to create fake earthquakes, to open up archaeological sites in the Middle East that are going to disprove the Bible, whatever that means. Think about that. What does that mean exactly? We're going to undermine Christianity. Monast was a very strong, devout Christian, apparently. And do all of these things to create a new world order. All right. Well, and his belief was that it was going to happen, before 2000. Now, he died in 1996, I believe. But it didn't happen, obviously. So the Bluebeam concept now has been taken by other people and said, to be the fake alien invasion. Here are my two problems with it. I'm certainly not saying that there are no false flags. I believe 9/11 was a false flag. I'll believe that to the day I die. And I do believe that the powers that be, the secret cabal, and there are such groups, do create fake crises to get people to do what they want. So that I have no problem with any of that happening. Bluebeam, I'm skeptical about. The logistics. How do you create a fake alien invasion, really, and make it credible, not just to the people, but you've got a global scientific community. Keep in mind, they're not just skeptical about aliens and UFOs. They're overtly hostile. And unless you have a way to shut every one of them up and prevent them from expressing a lifetime worth of opinions on this, you're going to have your work cut out for you. It's not just like a simple walk in the park. Oh, yeah, we'll create a Bluebeam scenario, scare the shit out of people, and make them submit to our fascist state. I just see that as a very tall order. And then the technology involved globally to do that, to really to convince people. I see that as difficult, very difficult. And if I were the guy trying to organize this, I would be beside myself with logistical nightmarish issues. How do you really do it? Now, having said that, I will leave open the possibility, because I do think that there are advanced technologies that are covertly concealed and employed by clandestine groups. I've argued, for example, for the existence of what I call a breakaway civilization, a group that's moved vastly ahead of the rest of us in terms of technology and science and cosmology even. And they might conceivably have the ability and desire to do this. But again, it comes down to, where is the evidence? All right. It's one thing to talk about these, but then it's another to examine the evidence and find out how plausible is this really, and what is it based on. And I just have not seen, when I look at the history of Monas, I just am not seeing anything that's credible for me.
I must be honest, I quite agree with you on the whole Bluebeam thing. I also thought it was just an extrapolation of what we've already been taught, just to scare people, to be perfectly honest.
And one thing I don't like these days is fear-mongering. There's a lot to be afraid of that's legitimate. What I feel like I have a lot of individuals who, for better or for worse, will look to me to provide an opinion on some of these things, and it's kind of...
Put you on a pedestal you don't want to be on.
Well, it does, right. And I didn't get into this field in order to get to that position. I really didn't. And when you find, though, that statements you make have an effect on other people, then you take it much more seriously. And I personally have a philosophy of being as fearless as I can possibly be in confronting the future. But also that means to be as clear-headed as I can be. And what I don't ever want to do is engage in spreading fear based on something that I can't myself find as solid evidence for. I'll never want to do that.
Well, it's very ethical. Let's get the people know that, especially if they're going to take on your material, they know where it's coming from.
And thank you. And that is why I sometimes am slow, not fast, to react to new events. But I'm very happy with that. I don't think it's a smart philosophy in anyone's life to react immediately to events around you. I think all of us need time sometimes to sit and to think. And it's harder in our age today because everything's right in front of us. I mean, Facebook is kind of like the National Enquirer of the internet. It's right. Everything is just like right out there. And then there's YouTube, and then there's all the other websites and blogs where things get copied and pasted and everything goes viral. And it's very easy for people to do that rather than to investigate the actual events themselves and find out what is the evidence for this or that new event. And I have to make sure that I do that.
On this particular line of inquiry, what would you perceive as the role of the alternative media today? And sort of what advice would you give to those people out there like yourself who are on this journey communicating this kind of information?
Yeah, you ask great questions. I think kind of along the lines of what I've been indicating, which is that you got to be fearless. You have to be prepared to accept, all kinds of conclusions that are out there, because what we've been fed 24/7 by a mainstream propaganda industry is just one lie after another after another. So in other words, I'm absolutely convinced that the more someone watches CNN or any of these other mainstream, the less likely they are to understand the actual machinations of the world around them. The more that the world is going to seem like a big fog to them when some new event happens. So we have to be fearless. But on the other side, and this is the difficulty, deep investigation is necessary. And deep, what I would call epistemology is necessary. In other words, we need to be asking ourselves the questions that you learn in Philosophy 101, which is, how do you know what you know? It means that the alternative media needs to be able to check sources as rigorously as possible and not to be inclined to promote something simply because it's what they want to believe to be true, or what they believe already to be true. It means subjecting ourselves to as much critical rigor as possible. And also, since you've gotten me on this question, to as little grandstanding and emotional ranting as possible. There's a lot of that. A lot of the very popular alternative media figures, and I won't even mention names, anyone who listens knows, they do good work. It's not that, but when you start yelling and getting emotional and becoming clearly affiliated with promoting an agenda, then really you don't help the cause. You chip away at your own credibility. And what we really, I think, should strive to do is as much detached, calm, objective analysis as we're able to bring to bear, so that we can have a conversation with these outside skeptical people who are going to have enough trouble as it is with what we have to say, and it'll be easier for them if they're engaging with people who sound a little bit like them.
Freedom of information is an important part of our evolutionary process at the moment. What is your view on freedom of information and its importance with what you're doing? As a historian, Obviously fact is important.
Exactly.
And getting to know the fact as free and fair and not controlled by anybody. Give me that perspective.
Well, we live in a very we live in an era of contradictions regarding freedom of information. On the one hand, we have the internet, we have the web, and we're having a global conversation in a way that was unthinkable 25 years ago, where people from everywhere around the world, there are no exceptions any longer. The web is everywhere. Now, there's censorship on the web, but really, the global connectivity is pretty much everywhere. And so we're able to learn things that were just not possible to learn previously. On the other hand, we're dealing with a great restriction of information as well. Looking at the United States archival system, for example, it is widely believed now that more than 50% of all U.S. government documents are classified in one way or another. So if you're thinking of it as an archivist trying to reconstruct the history of your government, well, you might just say that more than half of your government's history is secret. Wow. And so, that's the U.S., but do we really think that other nations are different? Other nations might be worse, they might be better, but basically we're dealing with a situation of widespread secrecy. So we need to have no illusions about this. This is a very difficult age in which we live. The United States passed its first significant Freedom of Information Act in the 70s. There had been one previously that didn't have much teeth. In 74, 75, the U.S. got a pretty good number of changes to FOIA that for about 6-7 years, into the early 80s, allowed researchers, especially regarding UFOs, to get thousands of pages of documents on this topic that had not been available before. But then, guess what? Through the Reagan years, FOIA was severely cut and made much more expensive, much less responsive to people. And it's had its ups and downs ever since. And it's in a down era, no question about it. Where, in fact, during the late end of the Clinton administration, a number of documents that had been declassified in the early 90s suddenly were reclassified So that perversely, if you as a researcher had gotten a document out of the archives in 1995, you might find in 1999 that it was illegal for you to have that document. So that you could keep it, but you wouldn't be able to publish it any longer. And that actually has happened. So we're in an era, at least in my country, where this is not, it's not a given that we'll have access to information. And one of the key elements, let me think of it this way. One of the most important foundations for our belief in freedom of information is that we have a democratic system of government. But in fact, if you're unable to get true access to information, you have to ask yourself, do you really have a democratic system of government? Are you dealing with an authoritarian system of government, which I think we are to a large degree? And if that's so, what does that say about the struggle for truth? In other words, American researchers and also researchers from other nations need to understand that they are not dealing with a so-called level playing field. We're dealing with a rigged game in a lot of ways. And we don't have the luxury of getting all of these declassified documents that we would like to have. We know we're dealing with a topic that deals with national security, that is highly classified, and we have to play this silly game now of waiting for leaks and waiting for someone to tell us this or that thing. And the problem with leaks is, when you get one, outsiders say, oh, well, it's a leak. What's the name? What's the source? Prove it, prove it, prove it. And that's not easy to do. Yeah. So, but having said all of that, you see, the beauty of our age that we live in is that, there are three factors in this equation of secrecy. There's these other beings, whatever they are. There's the secret keepers. But then the other part of the equation is us, our society. And in fact, we are the true variable in this equation. We are the part that's changing so dramatically right now. You think of our world 50 plus years ago, we lived in a totally different world. And now you look at our world today. We are on some kind of fast track toward transforming ourselves, not just as a society, not even just as a civilization, but really as a species. We're moving into an age of super advanced computing, artificial intelligence, sentient computing, in which, and then biotech changes, in which we ourselves are, what are we going to look like in 100 years as a society? Have you wondered? We're not going to look like this. We're not going to be stuck in 2011 forever. We're going to have capabilities in a short period of time as a society in which we can somehow, we're going to make a breakthrough in proving and communicating the reality of all of this. And when that happens, you see, that's going to force open these floodgates. And the powers that be are going to have to scramble to try to maintain control over the spin, over the dispensation of that data, but it's going to be a very difficult struggle for them. Because once this reality is on the table for public discussion, well, all hell is going to break loose.
Before we close off the interview, is there anything else you'd like to contribute?
Well, I don't know. I think we've covered quite a lot, haven't we? Again, I think it's important for all of us to go into this reality with our eyes as open as possible. I have a feeling that when I look at around me and the world that we live in, there are a lot of people who do have their eyes open and who are ready for this, but there are many people who don't have the opportunity. They have to work. They've got things to do, and they're in this zone. And so when we are confronted with the reality of these other beings that are operating at a different level than we are, that have vastly different technology, different agenda, different level of consciousness, we're going to have a challenge to meet that level of consciousness in some way or another. And I ask myself, are we as a society moving toward a greater level of consciousness to deal with this challenge? And I think, a little bit we are. But in a large measure, maybe we're not. Certainly, television culture is not helping us. Certainly, our media culture is not helping us for the most part. Our political, even academic cultures are really, I don't think, getting us to this level of meeting this challenge. So the only thing that's going to get us there is, unfortunately, the shock the shock of this reality, boom, being right here, laid right before us. And probably for a week or two or more, a bunch of people will be running around in circles, pulling the hair out of their heads. But the thing is, eventually, we're going to have to calm down. We're going to have to deal with this. And that is the moment in which billions of people on planet Earth are going to have a moment with themselves. They're going to say, have I been wasting my life? Is there another way for me to create my own life, to envision how I can live as a human being? Because there are these other beings here, and they don't operate like we do. And so I think that's going to be the great wake-up call for us as a species. I would like to think that it'll happen on a more gradual basis, that our ever-expanding consciousness will get us to that reality. But some people see that happening. I don't. What I think is going to happen is a little bit more of an unpleasant shock, a jolt, but I still think we'll get to it. Anyway.
Richard Dolan, it's been an honor and a privilege to have your time today. Thank you very much for the information, and we look forward to seeing you at the conference.
Thanks so much, Mel.